Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be reacting to how baboons led us to a lost civilization. Now, this is just interesting on two fronts. One, love animals. Animals are just uniquely underestimated always. As we are the alpha species, really just on a civilization point. But once we start to get a little more into the wild, you can start to see the animals definitely have the upper hand without our technology. But besides that point, the other side, of course, is a history video. A lost civilization. Been watching a lot of Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. There's no plug right there, but it's just an interesting topic, whether it be what we know versus what we don't know. It's curiosity at its finest. So this is SciShow. I think it's the first video we're watching of SciShow. If you like these types of videos where we talk about humanities, history, etc., I implore you to hit the subscribe button and join us for many more videos. But today, let's jump into this one. Hope you guys are doing well today. Let's go.
Call for, archaeologists are going to hate us. They'll be digging up all these recipes that call for eggs and be screaming, what kind of eggs? Like ostriches? Because everyone these days knows we all mean chicken eggs, so we don't bother to clarify. And this kind of non-specific record keeping is also what makes modern archaeologists hate the ancient Egyptians, with regards to their many descriptions of a land called Punt. Punt was—
Punt? Like punt? Is this in the Bible? Punt? I've heard of the land Punt before. Oh, no, where?
Was so famous that every single record we've managed to uncover hasn't bothered to specify where it is. But researchers may have finally made a breakthrough, and it's all thanks to some very, very dead baboons.
Okay, we're talking Egypt, which there were baboons in the Egyptian times in the Old Kingdom. I don't know if there's still baboons there. We did a video about the types of species around Egypt around this time. Let's see what they're talking about. That was the intro.
Now, Punt didn't literally drop off the map Atlantis style, lost to the ages due to an angry god. Instead, cultural and linguistic changes seem to have gradually left it behind. We don't even know its real name. Hieroglyphs don't really have vowels, so the exact pronunciation of Punt is a medium—
That is crazy to think hieroglyphics do not have vowels.
sized question mark. You could argue for something like Puenet or even Puenenet, but whatever it was called, it was a source of fabulous and expensive stuff. Incense was an especially big deal to the Egyptians, but they imported plenty of ebony and animals too. And this wasn't just a 1 or 2 time splurge. Punt is mentioned in hieroglyphic texts that span millennia. Consider the Old Kingdom ruler Sahure, who way back in the 25th century BCE commissioned a series of carvings that depict an expedition to Punt, returning with animals and other cargo. Or there's the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah, exotic, and those kings or pharaohs, however you want to call them, they were very into the exotics, and just importing. And it doesn't stop at the Egyptian kings. Pretty much any royalty back then.
Kingdom text, the tale of the shipwrecked sailor. It's about 500 years younger than those carvings, but that still makes it about 4,000 years old. It sometimes gets called the first work of fiction known to history. And in this tale—
Really? Because I know there was, forget the name of it, but wasn't there a one that was found in a well on a scroll? I forget what that story was, but there was this old story that was found. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Unsurprisingly, a sailor is shipwrecked. We can cut them a little slack on the title because they were just getting started. But anyway, in the tale, our shipwrecked sailor guy meets a giant golden serpent that describes itself as the ruler of Punt. It also showers him with a bunch of gifts before the dude gets home safe and sound. Now, this is clearly a made-up tale. The writer probably didn't think the actual ruler of Punt was a golden snake, but it shows that at the time it was written down, the land—
Could be personification, right? Isn't that like, or analogy?
Of Punt was likely
Not an analogy,
associated
a
with
metaphor.
incredible wealth and a mystical, otherworldly vibe. But perhaps the most famous representation of Punt is a set of reliefs on the walls of a temple dedicated to the pharaoh
Is that a big boat?
Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut reigned in the 1400s.
Hatshepsut.
BCE, and she was clearly very proud of the expeditions she dispatched. The reliefs depict both a bunch of Puntish goods being presented to her and Punt
It's like wheat or barley or something.
itself as a place filled with palm trees and raised
Or it could be palms, yeah.
buildings you have to access via ladders. And this super fancy relief also suggests that contact with Punt had been lost until Hatshepsut came along to reestablish it. And finally, we've got an inscription on a stone slab that dates back to like 500 or 600 BCE that suggests trade with Punt may have carried on for another 1,000 years after Hatshepsut's expedition. Put all of this together, and Egypt's relationship with Punt appears to be so important for so long that some scholars recognize it as the beginning of global commerce.
So yeah, in geographic terms, where is Punt?
Period. Of course, to confidently apply the global descriptor, it would be nice to know exactly where Punt was, and we've been asking that question since the 19th century. We know it was to the southeast of Egypt, but
Okay. So like Eritrea or the Red Sea, somewhere in that area? Or is it along the Nile?
that doesn't narrow it down a ton. We also know that ancient Egyptians weren't history's greatest boat builders, and their boats didn't have the deep keels that make it easier to navigate an ocean. So for a long time it was thought that the route to Punt had to go overland or up the Nile River. Until 2005, that is, when archaeologists were excavating an ancient seaport and stumbled upon an inscription that dates back to the 19th century BCE
19th century BCE, okay.
and basically says, Pharaoh told me to launch an expedition to Punt from here. So that kind of
To Punt from here. Okay.
settles that they would have sailed to Punt, but you might have figured out that still doesn't tell us where Punt itself is. Back in the 19th century, scholars initially settled on Somalia, but since then it's been shifted around to the Arabian Peninsula, southern Sudan, or northern Ethiopia, and even places as far away as Uganda.
Why have I heard of Punt before? I've heard it. I've heard of it, but I don't know when and where and how.
Or Mozambique. And these days, the consensus seems to be drifting slowly towards present-day Eritrea. But without archaeological evidence, it's pretty hard to narrow it down much more than that. But that hasn't stopped scientists from trying, and they've turned to a rather peculiar version of a first-hand account. Because, you see, the secret of Punt may lie with the mummified remains of baboons. Pardon the interruption,
That's where we get into the baboons. Is this an ad?
I've got some good news. Well, it's actually good news. Good are the people who bring you the good newspaper, where they're hopeful and a lot of that get asked. Fiction comes, but they're ink. Newspaper.org you can kill. And Thoth, a god of knowledge, ancient Egyptians considered baboons to be kind of a big deal. And
it's interesting. What is thought of as a good animal versus a bad animal, you know? For example, cats, good for Egyptian. Baboons, good.
Thoth, a god of knowledge and writing, was sometimes depicted as a sitting baboon. And baboons were venerated, sometimes even mummified, for millennia. From prehistory straight up to the last dynasty of pharaohs who ruled from around...
Were they pets? Because I know that could be like an interesting thing.
300 to 30 BCE. There is one catch though. Baboons aren't native to Egypt, and they...
Well, depends. That depends. Because there were baboons in the Old Kingdom. But is there like a thing you're about to say where you're going to say that they were imported there around that time?
They never have been, or at least never at the same time as humans. Every single baboon we found there, and we found a lot, was either imported or bred in captivity. So where did ancient
Bred in captivity, okay.
Egyptians get them? From Punt, of course, or at least some of them anyway. Both Sahure's carvings and Hatshepsut's temple specifically depict baboons, and
So this is a drawing. This is an outline of a depiction of one. It's very hard. I wish I could see this palette or whatever it is, you know, this carving or work without this geometrical shape in the line, so I could see for myself. I guess.
The tale of the shipwrecked sailor includes them among the gifts. So simple reasoning suggests that if we can figure out where the baboons are from, and we already know they're from Punt, that lets us finally pinpoint Punt on a map. Now, you can't ask a 3,500-year-old
You're gonna go off of where a baboon could be?
mummified baboon where it was born. Not only do they not speak any human languages, they're dead. But believe it or not, there are a few ways scientists can figure out an animal's geographic origin. And one of those is with the element strontium, or more specifically, 2 isotopes of strontium. Every atom of strontium has the exact same number of protons. That's what makes them strontium in the first place. But atoms of the same element are allowed to have different numbers of neutrons. Some neutron counts make an atom unstable and radioactive. Some are perfectly stable, but they're all just different isotopes.
Okay.
It takes a bit of effort, but scientists can detect the differences between isotopes of the same element, which opens up a whole flood of applications. See, if you wander out into nature and pick up a rock with any strontium in it, you're almost certainly going to find a blend of at least 2 isotopic flavors called strontium-86 and strontium-87. And the exact ratio of that blend will vary depending on where the rock comes from. But strontium isn't just found in rocks. It naturally gets taken up by the body in trace amounts and incorporated into bones and teeth.
Okay. Very interesting. So it's like something, does it have to do with something with calcium or something? Calcification of, I don't know.
But teeth are done growing after a bit, like 3 years into a baboon's life, while bones continue to remodel themselves. So studying the strontium ratio in a baboon's teeth can tell you where it lived when it was young, if not where it was born, and the ratio in its bones can tell you if they eventually moved away for a significant period of
That's very interesting. I don't know how they correlate that though.
time. To find where a specific animal came from, you just have to make a map detailing the strontium isotope ratios in different locations, test the ratio of strontium in your animal, and then match that ratio to the right spot on your map.
It makes sense in theory, but I want to hear them out.
And in a 2020 paper, researchers did just that with some ancient Egyptian baboons. Some of the
Mummified baboons?
specimens matched up with strontium ratios you'd naturally find in, well, Egypt. While that's not particularly helpful in finding Punt, it does support the idea that baboons were sometimes raised in captivity. However, the authors did find one baboon skull dating to the New Kingdom that had
New Kingdom, so somewhere, what is that, like 1800 BC? Somewhere in that time?
clearly been imported from somewhere
Or
else.
2000?
The strontium ratio in its bone tissue matched with Egypt, suggesting it had lived there for some time. However, its teeth had a totally different ratio,
Because they grow in so their teeth.
which means it had been born outside of Egypt. The question then became where it had been imported from. The strontium ratios in the teeth pointed to somewhere in Yemen, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, or Ethiopia.
That is really okay. So I actually understand this now. Like I was like, there's no way. I'll add a caveat to this. Maybe they were born in this location, but does that necessarily mean Punt?
Ethiopia, which doesn't get us much of anywhere in narrowing down Punt's location. At the very least, it did match archaeological consensus. But fortunately, we can do better. Maybe even a lot better. See, it's possible that a 2023 paper by a
3 years later.
mostly different group of researchers has narrowed Punt down to an exact site.
Why?
But to explain how, I have to go into just a little bit more history. By the time ancient
Name of it, Alexander the Great and hieroglyphics. Okay, so this is like the symbol for Alexander the Great.
Egyptians had entered their let's get taken over by Alexander the Great phase circa 300 BCE, they were getting their baboons from a place called Adulis. And we happen to know exactly where
Eritrea?
Adulis was, on the coast of present-day Eritrea. So these researchers weren't looking for Punt, they were looking to establish exactly how far back trade between Egypt and Adulis went. And they were especially interested in a cache of baboon remains dating to somewhere around 800 to 500 BCE. But instead of strontium, they they went straight to DNA evidence. The researchers sequenced the mitochondrial DNA of a bunch of baboons from this cache, and also referenced sequences that had already been published elsewhere. Altogether, they ended up with 14
That's a lot.
skeletons and 1 mummy to work from.
A
Now,
lot.
previous work had already created a way to assign a baboon to a specific mitochondrial DNA family that corresponds to a
That is so specific and interesting.
specific geographic region. So the team was able to show that their mummified baboon corresponded to a genetic group that, at least today, lives in Eritrea and eastern Sudan. If they haven't moved around much since then, and science suggests they have not, this closely connects the mummy to Adulis, which for an archaeology nerd is really interesting, because this potentially pushes back the date that ancient Egypt was trading with Adulis by centuries. However, it also draws an even more tantalizing connection back to Punt. Remember that fragmentary inscription I mentioned, the one that talks about Punt around 500 or 600 BCE?
Okay.
Well, the age of that inscription overlaps with the age of this cache of baboons. So if the baboons are from Adulis, but maybe also from Punt, then maybe Adulis is Punt? Maybe it just went through a little bit of a rebrand. Or as the paper puts it, our findings appear to establish primatological continuity between Punt and Adulis. It's certainly not a slam dunk, and
It's a guess.
the authors don't try to pretend like it is, but apparently they're not the only researchers making this connection, and they're making it with DNA evidence. So have we found the lost land of Punt? Well, it seems very possible, though I suspect archaeologists will continue to speculate for years to come. It's kind of funny when you think about it. The ancient Egyptians venerated the god of knowledge through these baboons and preserved their bodies as part of that. And that act of veneration kept the baboons around long enough that we're able to learn from them today. I bet Thoth is pretty pleased.
Okay, cool. Interesting. I think, yeah, I mean, best you can do here is a correlation situation. You have Atlas, which is an idea where it could be just because there were baboons and it was trade depicted. There's a lot of guesswork here and assumptions. So it's almost like this is where I think Atlantis was. It's in the same ballpark. Very interesting. I really love that not the correlation, but the idea about utilizing strontium isotopes to determine, especially utilizing the teeth, knowing that the teeth grew in the first 3 years for some bones continuously evolve. So that's a super smart, interesting way to look at things, and we'll keep that in the back of our heads as we navigate future conversations archaeologically. Hey, that was interesting. I would say, forget the Punt part. The isotope thing was far more interesting. So that's what we'll leave it at. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a comment if you have a video recommendation, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out. Bye-bye.